Why do you think Beethoven wrote such a powerful but rather serene piece at one of his darkest periods in his life?
Well, I mean, there's a popular myth that composers write the way they feel at the moment that they're writing, which is simply not true. For example, Tchaikovsky wrote his Pathétique when he was suicidal. You could see him wanting to die and sitting down the piano. Not at all. You cannot write. If you're suicidal, you kill yourself or you stay in bed depressed. You don't write music. As everything Beethoven did, it is a gloss on something that had been done and a revolutionary step of breaking out of the mold, but the mold is always visible behind what he does. In other words, what this piece has is a rather conventional, if you want, nothing's conventional in Beethoven, but if you want, the first movement, which is sonata form, right? The development section of that first movement is very unusual in that it relies on repetitions all the time. But he then he stops, right? And then he has a conventional slow movement, which is the so-called scene at the brook. And the only thing really that is unconventional about it, because it is a kind of song form, is the coda, in which he suddenly introduces a cadenza for woodwinds of the orchestra, one imitating a nightingale, one imitating a quail, one imitating the cuckoo, nightingale. This was new. That's a quail, that's the wachtel, and the cuckoo goes underneath. Teet-titty is the wachtel, that's the cuckoo. The nightingale's choice, so the three together. Next cadence. Pretty conventional, beautiful movement of flowing. One thing a lot of people don't know about this movement is that the melody begins on the first beat. So they usually think this is accompanied, and that's the melody. But actually, the melody begins on the first beat if you look at the score. And you see that they play, the violins who have the melody play bum. That's the beginning of the melody. Then it continues, da-da-da, all of which is just an ornamentation of that first single B flat. In other words, it goes D. The melody's already begun. See, that's not the beginning of the melody, that phrase. It's an elaboration of the single note, B flat. It's just a way of ornamenting that single note. Then he turns it into a melody further by, and suddenly you have something going. But the beginning of the melody is that. That's what the melody is about. It's not the ordinary conception of a melody. It's ornamentation. One note, ornamentation. And out of this ornament, he makes a melody. The minute he gets to the dominant, you know he's in the middle of a melody. Sorry for the wrong notes. Now it blooms as a real melody, something we recognize as a tune. This is the last note of the melody, which also is the first note of the repetition of the melody. If you listen, you'll see. That's his tune. for good or bad. I mean, that's the way Beethoven wrote melodies. He was not a great melodist. What he was interested in was seeds, motives, things out of which he could bring melodies. This is one of the most unremarkable melodies ever written. One of the most famous, but you couldn't call it a melody, could you? Seventh Symphony. So far, what have you got? One note. Now. Some melody. Now it becomes a little more melodic. You like that melody? You do? So do I. But is it a melody? No. There is no aspect of Beethoven in which you can say Beethoven is great as a melodist, a harmonist, a contrapuntist, a tone painter, his orchestration. You can find fault with all of them. If you take any one of these elements separately, you find nobody. There's nothing there. He spent his whole life trying to write a good fugue, and he himself admitted he never succeeded.
Well, what makes it interesting?
Well, it's the form. Well, form is a mold that can be made to be very uninteresting factor. But in Beethoven's case, the form is all because it is a case of what note succeeds every other note. And in Beethoven's case, it is always the right next note, as though he had some private telephone wire to heaven which told him what the next note had to be. No composer ever had that, even Mozart, to that degree, where everything is so unpredictable and yet so right. It all checks. It all works out. You can rely on it. You know the next note has to be the next note and the only next note that could come. And that makes his form perfect. How he had this, nobody knows, because he struggled, he scratched out, he never left his rooms. He went crazy, and he kept saying, well, I'm writing only the tip of the iceberg of what I really feel, what I could really write. His room was a mess. His food was uneaten. For 3 days, it was stale. The chamber pot was unemptied under his piano. He moved all the time. He couldn't find a place that was right. He kept trying. If you look at those sketches, you see the crossings out. You see the agonies that this man went through. And what has finally appeared as the finished product looks as though it was simply phoned in from God. That's what's so incredible.